Among the many interesting biographical tidbits of Francesco Petrarca is his distinction of being supposedly the world's first mountain climber. He was not, of course. It was all sort of PR. But he did write a very famous account of his experience climbing a mountain for no particular reason. Just for the experience, for the recreation, for the opportunity to see things. It had been done before, but he happened to write about it, and then it became a little bit more of a legend that way. The account he writes of it, however, is of greater significance than any little trivia tidbit that is mostly PR anyway. The account he writes of it, of the ascent of Mont Ventoux in the northeast of France, is it's a fascinating little document that some people will say marks the birth of the Renaissance, or the birth of humanism specifically. The experience is really pretty remarkable for Petrarch, and the idea of this document is he is writing a letter. It is in his letters that he sends to friends and keeps copies of, because he's basically copying Cicero and doing that. But he writes to his friend supposedly right after he comes back down the mountain. So the experience is very fresh and he's able to communicate it. But at the same time, that reporting aspect of it gives an implication that this is somehow more truthful, more true to life, more a sense of reporting than anything else. But the actual construction of it as a narrative also leads considerable. It suggests, let's say, rather considerably, that the document itself is a piece of artistic construction, a piece of art. The specifics, of course, don't really matter. But in the year 1336, he writes this letter saying that he was inspired to climb this mountain after reading and reflecting in I think it's Livy on what is it, Philip of Macedon having climbed a mountain and looked across his realm and blah blah blah, and being inspired to do that. Significantly, a figure of classical history, Greco-Macedonian history, if you will, and so he was inspired by that. The classics are very big in the Renaissance, of course. But he takes it to be more than that. He decides to follow in that example. He gathers together some colleagues. He goes looking through for his friends, and here you start to get a sense that, well, okay, maybe there's something else going on, because he starts going through a companion for the ascent. I realized, strangely enough, that hardly any of my friends were suitable. And then he starts going through a number of friends, not by name, of course, but saying, well, this one, not for this reason, not for that, none of which are disqualified for any physical capacity that climbing a mountain might necessitate. But, one was too anxious, too slow, too hasty, too sad, too happy. Very little about it being, okay, this is a rigorous physical attempt we're making here, and I need somebody whom I can rely on. That would seem to be a little considerable. So right there, I think he's starting to dwell in, well, this isn't necessarily a physical experience that he's talking about here. That's just me. That's just me speculating there. He settles on, of all people, his brother, who is in and out of the narrative from then on, but doesn't play a particularly prominent part. But they walk to they embark on the mission. They go to a little town at the foot of the mountain. They run into an old man who says, "Well, yeah, what are you doing that for? You know, you're climbing it. Why? I climbed it myself 50 years ago, and nobody's done it since. And I went up. I looked around. All I got for it were a bunch of scratches and bruises. What's the point?" Practical. Historically, this has been disproven also that other people had climbed it more recently than that. But this is a sense of an older generation doing this and not getting any particular benefit out of it. Why? What's the point? I climbed it. I came back down. My life's no different. I'm just a little bit more banged up. But Petrarch and his brother just like, no, we're going. So they start climbing, and they're going up, and a number of times we're told Petrarch's brother is going up in a fairly straight line, very charging. Younger brother, maybe a little stronger, maybe a little better shape. Petrarch, however, discusses himself going, in a little bit more roundabout way, trying to find an easier path. And here, again, we're led into a realm of a kind of, is this an allegory? Certainly the idea of climbing a mountain is a well-established allegory for ascending to heaven. He is in Dante's Commedia is about climbing a mountain largely, and always ascending higher, except in the beginning where he has to go low to get high, whatever. But it's a well-established metaphor. And here when he talks about, I was trying to find the easy way and wending around and not getting anywhere for my troubles, but just getting more winded and tired and wasting all sorts of my time and energy, it starts to sound a little bit allegorical. Yeah, that's fairly obvious. At one point he starts to get tired, and he sits down. He says, on one mountain peak, the highest of all, the country people call Filiolis, also known as Sunny, in the translated from the Latin. Why, I do not know, unless by antiphrasis, as is sometimes the case, for the peak in question seems to be the father of all the surrounding ones. The father. He's dwelling on that. The father, the giant peak in this realm. Exactly where this is falling in terms of the geography of the mountain itself, I don't know. I don't really care. But he's identifying with it as a father, the father of all surrounding it. Well, okay, right there, he's setting up another obvious kind of metaphor, and he starts to talk to the mountain, if you will, and he starts to complain to it and wonder aloud. And then as he's dwelling on this physical manifestation of the Father, he starts thinking about his own past, his own recent past. He comes to acknowledge that, it has been 10 years since I completed my my youthful studies and left Bologna. So this suddenly has a certain temporal quality to him, to the experience. It has a significance, and he's able to think back, having ascended to this point on the mountain where he sees vast expanses of space. He is now reflecting on the expanse of time and the significance of it to him. And it is all within himself as a referent. He's concerned about the space in that he's standing up there, and he can see the Rhone Valley underneath him and sea stretching out from him. He even speculates on the placement of the Pyrenees well south, and he says, "Well, I know I can't see that, but that's out there." But everything is located within him. He looks off to the left, and he sees Italy, and he thinks about how he was born there, and this, of course, is the great significance to him from the Roman past. So he is surveying a huge expanse of space and now also of time, and he is situating himself right in the center of it because everything is from his perspective. It's not any particular passage of time. It is the passage of time in relation to how long he has been a adult, let's say. This is a centralizing focus on himself that isn't really, well, that is very much consonant with the coming Renaissance and a branching off from and divergent from the existing traditions of the Middle Ages. This is accentuated when he says, "After being misled this way a number of times, I finally sat down in a hollow, and my thoughts quickly turned from material things to the spiritual, as I had said to myself more or less what follows." And then he starts a long description of his existence and the nature of existence and the nature of existence in time and place. And it is that turn. It is that turn from the physical to the spiritual and the idea of the melding of the two. Think in terms of Dante's experience at the end of each of the three books of the Commedia, where the image that he ends on is of the pilgrim and the stars, the man, humanity, and looking at heaven. Now you have Petrarch, the modern man, let's say, who is looking up at the heavens, but seeing in it only himself. The study of oneself is humanism. The study of man is the Renaissance. And here he brings that out. Here he anchors the experience of the divine within the physical realm. And the flipping back and forth of the idea of the spiritual and the material, the spiritual and the physical, when you're not quite sure about the allegorical value of going up the mountain, or you're not quite sure about the allegorical value of the father of the mountains, and the perspective in it is always of the single human being within the physical setting. It is remarkably self-validating in terms of humanity itself. He very significantly, at a certain point, goes off and says, well, okay, he was sitting there at the top of the mountain with his brother, and he has to, he decides that he has to read something. And then he takes out a copy of Augustine's Confessions. Because when you're, lugging up a mountain, you really want a book with you. But okay, fine. He brought a book. He brought the book, that book. And then he just says, well, okay, like Augustine, I am just going to open this up and read whatever comes to mind. And he does, and it comes out, and he says, he finds it. Now I happen to have a chance to open it to the 10th book. My brother stood attentively waiting to hear what St. Augustine would say from my lips. As God is my witness, and my brother too, the first words my eyes fell upon were, and men go about admiring the high mountains and the mighty waves of the sea and the wide sweep of rivers and the sound of the ocean and the movement of the stars, but they themselves they abandon. That is the famous scene in Augustine in the garden when he has his final conversion and decides to give himself over to to God and to Christ and to the spiritual profession, if you will. So here he is equating it with that. He is not saying that he is going to go and become a monk now or anything like that. No, he is saying that he is going to focus on himself. He is devoting his life to a worldly endeavor, an endeavor of poetry, an endeavor of art, not the endeavor of spirituality, but he's pairing them by having one next to the other and saying, well, it's equivalent, it's one and the same. So again, that blending of the godly and the humane. And now, on the one hand, yes, this is really starting to reach the point where you're thinking, okay, this is all BS. This is not a truthful account. This is highly improbable. This is all that stuff. All right, maybe, fine. Who cares? As a document of a kind of conversion, it is very significant because he is describing up until this point how, yes, he was taking a wayward path. He was going all over the place. He was shooting down naysayers and saying, what's the point? He was holding true to his ambition. He was holding true to his vision. And in the end, he was rewarded with that. And as he then goes down the mountain, he is dwelling on this and he's thinking about it. And he recommits himself to going back to he recommits himself to art. He recommits himself to poetry. He recommits himself to introspection, to basing his art on what is inside himself. And that is, whether this is just a legend or not, that is in its truest form the birth of humanism.